Welcome to the Muscle Expert Podcast with Ben Pakulski, one of the world's top professional bodybuilders, an expert on human performance and mindset mastery. Ben dives deep to deliver the strategies of the top experts to upgrade your body, mind, muscle, strength, performance, biochemistry, and how to become the upgraded modern man. Join us on benpakulski.com to learn the cutting-edge techniques to take control of your body, your brain, and create your greatest life.
Hey, what's up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to another episode of the Muscle Expert Podcast. I'm your host, Ben Pakulski, and today we're going to talk about brain health. We all are so focused on optimizing our body, training, nutrition, all these things, and sometimes we don't understand the necessities of optimizing what's going on upstairs. Your brain is governing everything. Your motivation, your sleep, your stress, your ability to build muscle is all going to be governed between your ears, and yet we neglect it. We don't pay attention to it, and there's some very, very simple and basic practices you should be implementing every single day to make the most of your body, to make the most of your brain, to make the most of your life. And these things matter. So if you're someone who hasn't been paying attention historically to your brain and how your brain literally governs everything, I suggest you sit down and listen to this episode with Mr. Ryan Glatt. This guy has designated himself a brain health expert. And we talk about how you can use exercise, different types of exercise, to optimize your physical state and your brain. So sit down, enjoy the episode. And as always, if you know somebody who has a brain, who maybe wants to make the most of it, share this episode. Have an amazing day and live your greatest life. Sweet. So, dude, as I was saying, first and foremost, thank you for being here because, as I said, for the last 20 years, man, I was on this mission to understand my body. I was on the mission to understand my internal chemistry, and I just neglected this thing above my neck. It just wasn't part of my body. I didn't think it was all that important.
Yeah.
Partially true and not true, right? Obviously, as I was studying the muscle building aspect, there had to be some brain involved. I was using my brain, but I didn't really realize how much it was governing everything we do. How much is governing our mood, how much is governing our motivation, how much is governing our ability to do literally everything in life, our ability to be successful and fail conversely in everything. So now I've literally shifted my entire focus to helping people understand their brain, man, which is why I was so fascinated when I did some research on what you do, man. Because ultimately, and here's my articulation of it, Ryan, is I can give 1,000 people the best muscle building transformation program in the world, the best program, the best diet, the best supplement program. And at least 20% of them, at least 20% of them typically will succeed. At least 80% of them typically will fail.
Right.
And you go, why? Now, when I say fail, that doesn't mean no results, but that means not amazing, like what they should be seeing. I go, okay, well, why? It's habits, it's motivation, it's stress, it's all these things. And where does it all start? It all starts in the brain. So when I heard you are teaching people brain health, I was like, oh. And then we just briefly had a conversation before this, and you started telling me about some of the cool things you're adding into training, which I was like, man, that sounds awesome. Because once you get the execution variable, now adding these extra potentially added benefits on there, I was like, oh, now this sounds extremely intriguing, man. So tell our listeners what you do. Yeah.
Yeah. So my background's in personal training. I was going for physical therapy, and I really wanted to help people who were impaired physically. I saw my mom go through a leg amputation due to kidney disease and neuropathy, and so I was very inspired by her journey. And I would spend a lot of time watching her go through her physical therapy sessions when I was a trainer. And I started at 24-hour fitness. I started at the very bottom of just beginning, got my cert and just jumped in there. And I'm not the biggest guy. I'm the opposite of you. I'm like the linguine noodle. So I quickly became the nerdy guy that really studied corrective exercise. So if muscle gain wasn't my thing, if fat loss wasn't my thing, I sucked at helping people lose fat. I could do better now, but I probably still suck at it. But I wasn't good at the traditional fitness objectives of getting people to where they want to go, except for people who were in pain and needed more mobility. And so I would kind of specialize in that. And so as I went down the physical therapy route, I got my bachelor's in exercise science, and I sought out every certification that I could. I got more into the functional movement side, the Gray Institute of Motion. I started learning pain neuroscience, and I was very service-minded. I still am. And I went to live in West Africa for 1 year, a country called Gambia, to work with kids with cerebral palsy while working on a clean water project. And I had gotten into a school in Scotland because it was very hard to get into PT schools in the US. As smart as I might sound or look, I'm not that good at my GPA or GRE or anything like that. So I applied to school in Scotland, got into a 2-year physiotherapy program, went to Scotland. This is at the peak of the Ebola outbreak in West Africa. And I show up with a big Jew fro, a backpack, and an African painting. I had just blown off my finger with a firework. And I had these huge bandages. People call me tampon fingers because I'd blown it off with a firework on Christmas. So I show up to the airport like this. I say, I'm here, and I have the wrong visa. They put me in an interrogation room for 8 hours and say I'm being deported back to LA because I had the wrong visa, and I'm sketchy as crap. And so I'm actually ending up in this immigration detention jail for 7 days before I get a flight back to LA. On that flight back to LA, I'm rethinking my future. And then I signed up for this thing called the anatomy trains, structural integration, or kinesis myofascial integration. If you've heard of anatomy trains and Tom Myers, I did his bodywork program. So I combined movement with bodywork and manual therapy. And I started working with CrossFit athletes, with people in pain. I mean, anyone in LA I could get my hands on. I worked at a pelvic floor facility. I worked with physical therapists. I did all sorts of stuff. And then I even worked for a golf company doing golf-specific bodywork and corrective exercise, which was, golf's not even my passion, but I really enjoy it.
You sound like you're about 70 years old, man. How have you accomplished all this stuff?
I'm only 26, man, but I grew fast. So
yeah,
while I was at this golf company and post this experience with cerebral palsy, I was really fascinated by the nervous system. And I saw functional neurology, and I saw psychology, and I saw people, go to anger management. I saw that side of things, this top-down side of things. But I really became fascinated with the tools that I have as a health coach, as a trainer, as a manual therapist. Can I help people with this? And as I saw people come to me in pain, they had lower executive function, lower mental process abilities that were affected by pain. But even if they weren't in pain, they wouldn't pay attention to the exercises I would show them. They wouldn't remember what we did. They had poor emotional control. And these were like successful people that worked out on a regular basis, ate pretty well. So they're already getting those general benefits, right, that we hear about. Exercise and nutrition benefits your brain. But why do they still have these executive function problems? And why can't I help with that? If I told these people to go see a psychologist, they give me the middle finger because there's not necessarily something wrong with them, but their cognitive health is not optimal. And so I just dove into the neuroscience as much as I could. And I said, I feel that we have the tools. Our industry has the tools. And a lot of people have discouraged me, saying that trainers aren't smart enough. They won't get it. They can only do one thing. And I say, no, there's higher echelons of individuals that are passionate, that are curious, that want to help. And exercise, nutrition, sleep, and all these other types of mindset top-down approaches that either we can supply or work with allied health professionals to supply can help people, because people do not know how to navigate the space of cognitive optimization, autonomic nervous system regulation, and really get people into that area that they want cognitively and psychologically, not just physically. And so I left this golf company to start finding ways to put together educational systems to teach our field how to do this. And then I launched my own brain health coaching business, got some certifications in behavior change and brain health coaching, and basically started to work with people with anxiety. Psychologists would refer people with addiction, depression to me because they were already doing the top down, but they wanted to do it from the lifestyle perspective at the same time. And then I would start to work with people who just wanted general cognitive optimization and see what I could do from a top-down and bottom-up perspective to get them there. And sometimes it was as easy, and I'm not going to say easy, but it was just letting people know that they might want to see a mental health professional. I was kind of that middleman for people because it's stigmatized and they don't know when to go. But if you kind of help them list out what their main stressors are, and it's like, it sounds like you might have some anxiety, we could use the help of a cognitive behavioral therapist or a neurofeedback practitioner or a meditation coach, and then refer out just like we would for injuries, then we can really deliver people a quality of care that they would not get by themselves. And you're with this every second of the day, even if you're sleeping, your whole life. So why wouldn't we be able to help with that? And that's one of the things I do now is brain health coaching. And we can definitely dive into the systems and the approach because I do believe whether you do education with me or not, we have all the tools, the education, the information out there to deliver brain health for everybody.
Hey guys, I interrupt this podcast to bring you a special announcement from ATP Labs. We have just released essential amino acids, and this stuff tastes amazing. And even above that is the highest quality essential amino acids on the planet available today. So why do you want essential aminos? Essential aminos are the things that your body doesn't make. They're essential because you must provide them dietarily through food or supplementation. And because so many of us are restricted in the way we eat, we don't eat many different types of protein. Sometimes we may actually be lacking in one or two of these essential aminos, which will actually shut down your body's ability to perform certain functions. So when I take essential aminos, always, without fail, pre-workout, often intra-workout, and sometimes post-workout, because I don't take a lot of protein powders. Most protein powders historically didn't sit really well in my stomach, whether it was vegan, whether it was whey, didn't do very well until I found ATP. A lot of these things didn't work for me. So if you want to check out ATP Labs, you can go to atplab.com, pick up the brand new essential aminos. In my hand, I'm holding unflavored aminos, but we have raspberry flavor, which tastes awesome, mixes super well, and you know you're getting the best quality on the planet because ATP cares about what goes into the product as much as I care about what goes in my body. Have an awesome day. Enjoy the rest of the podcast. So Ryan, I feel as though the reality is in every industry we go to, it's actually very hard to find great professionals, you know, and you speak about psychotherapists and, cognitive behavioral therapists. The reality is that I'm afraid to go to those people. Like, even if I thought, I've got mental issues, I'd be afraid to go to them because in every industry, whether it be personal trainers, whether it be, cognitive specialists, you have people that are absolutely amazing at what they do. And then people who are just trying to take your money. And I think the beauty of what you're doing is you're someone who's passionate about this, and you could probably help everyone with all these different issues, right? It's like the step one is, okay, let's make sure we're optimizing what your brain is doing on the inside. And how much do you think you can influence somebody's outcome, somebody's cognitive state by influencing their brain health?
I mean, massively. If we're talking the outcome of a health outcome.
Sure. So I'm thinking more of a cognitive outcome. Like, someone has anxiety, somebody has stress, somebody has, maybe it's mild depression. And obviously that's a can of worms we may not want to open, but those things that I feel that are so rampant in society that I believe can be influenced and often controlled with optimizing health, nutrition, internal chemistry of the body. Are those things that you feel as though we can influence?
Absolutely. So there's a lot of research showing the benefits of exercise, nutrition, and sleep on all those conditions. And so when we see that research and we say, all right, well, there's different dosages or different approaches with exercise, nutrition, and sleep, which are all bottom-up processes, and even breathing, which is a bottom-up process, it's a body-first process, then we look at maybe if we found those acute variables that are right for each person, no matter what their condition is, we assign that to them, and we are able to get them behavior change within each of those domains, then theoretically we should be able to help a lot of people. And I can give you some examples of one of my clients with anxiety of how I approach it. And I think that would help.
Even before we dive into that, I'd love to get that example, but I want you to talk about, just brain health.
Sure.
So before we get into like the weeds of helping people and how you help them, let's talk about what brain health means. So you're a brain health expert. You're a brain health practitioner. You've worked in a lot of different genres in this space. You've been around some very bright people, learned from some of the brightest people in the world when it comes to brain health. And obviously you are one yourself.
Right.
How do you define brain health?
So the way I would define brain health is optimal performance of cognition, psychology, and mindset. And psychology and mindset are usually in the same bucket. And let me define cognition. Cognition is just a summary of all the mental processes required to interact day to day with anything you're doing, whether it's a task, a person, an environment, an exercise. You're using your brain at all times. And so cognition, usually refers to something called executive function. That's one of the aspects of cognition. And executive function is what the research talks about when exercise improves brain structure or function. They're talking about improving executive function. Now, it also improves brain structure and other aspects of cognition, but let's just talk about executive function for now. Executive function includes attention, memory, emotional regulation, planning, and organization. all the things that are critical for day-to-day life. And so a lot of these interventions and the research using these interventions, either in nutrition, sleep, exercise, breathing, usually look at the effects on executive function. And typically they're positive, but there's so many variables, it's just hard to say this is good for this is good for this. It really just depends. But executive function is one key aspect of brain health. So if your executive function isn't working well, a great way to figure this out is just don't sleep, don't exercise, and eat like shit. You will quickly notice how this feels, right? How your brain feels.
Right.
And what will happen is you'll feel slower processing speed. You'll probably have worse memory, worse verbal fluency, worse attentional processes, whether it's sustained attention or switching tasks or even trying to multitask, divided attention. You'll find all of those things are worse. So your executive function's gone down. So if we slept well, you feel sharper, you can be clearer, you can remember things better, your executive function goes up. Same thing with most modalities of exercise. If you don't exercise or stay active, same thing happens, executive functions go down. If you do exercise, considering you're not overtraining, you're doing a healthy amount, then executive function goes up. With nutrition, we're starting to see different foods improve executive function or cognitive function, and certain foods do not. And so that's how I would define brain health, is a combination of top-down, bottom-up, and environment-based factors that allow us to be at optimal cognitive and psychological state.
Awesome. The first question that comes to mind for me, and I want you to address this, is what percentage of this, in your opinion or your experience, is influenceable?
Right.
So I know a lot of people, and in every aspect of life, well, I just don't have good genetics for that. You know, I've transcended the conversation of genetics when it comes to muscle building. You tell me I have shitty muscle building genetics, I tell you you're fully baloney. You just don't know how to do it. Right. Obviously, there's varying degrees. Everyone's going to have a varying ability to build muscle, but everyone can build a world-class body if they decide that's what they want to do and they have the steps.
100%.
So what percentage of this brain health game or this optimal brain function game is influenceable?
100% of it, I think. I think that age, gender, genetics, environment, socioeconomic status, those are all factors. But I wouldn't say those factors make it unchangeable or uninfluenceable, if that's a word. But it's really about those factors are just factors. They may change the rate of change or the degree of change. But the fact is the brain is extremely plastic. We've all heard about neuroplasticity, the ability for the brain to change itself. Norman Doidge wrote about this extensively, where you have very, very impaired individuals that don't even have a sense of their body or can't walk, and they recover. And so it's through these mechanisms of neuroplasticity. Yeah. So if they can do it, why can't the general healthy population do it?
Right.
And sometimes the changes aren't that extreme for us, but it's all able to be influenced by these factors. The question is, what influences what and how much? And that's where the brain health coaching piece or the specificity, the research really comes in, is we get to look at those variables so we can be precise with it. Because it's not enough anymore to say, just exercise and you'll get a healthy brain. Well, what if they're already active 5 to 7 days a week and they have a good variety of exercises? Or let's say they're just doing high intensity interval training. Maybe the first step is to give them a variety of modalities so they get the cognitive benefits of other things like coordination training and aerobic training instead of just high intensity resistance training, right? And so, but if they are already doing that, then we have to get more specific because you've adapted. And if you've adapted, as you know, just like with the body, we have progressive overload. The same principles apply to the brain. It's a little bit more plastic. The mechanisms are a lot more different, but the principles are relatively the same. It's adaptable. It likes variety. It likes complexity, novelty. It's a motoric system, so it moves with the body. It's not this top-down process. It's this integrated process. And that's why I love fields like embodied cognition, embodied neuroscience, where they're looking at how this is also a brain. We hear about the gut being the brain, but the body's also intelligent. But the reality is, if you have a brain with no body, you're not doing anything, you're not going anywhere. If you have a body without a brain, you're also not doing anything, you're dead. And so a lot of people take sides. Oh, it's all about the gut. It's all about the brain. No, it's top down, bottom up, and external in factors, your environment, that makes these things possible. But everything in each of those categories, environment, top down and bottom up, can be influenced. I
know a lot of our listeners, and honestly, I lived this reality for a long time. I inflicted a lot of unknown to me damage on my brain when I was a child. So a lot of contact sports, a lot of terrible nutrition, and I got to university And I just thought I was dumb. I just thought that everyone else was smarter than me. I had a really hard time. I didn't realize how influenceable, like we said, if that is even a word, I've used it 4 times now. How much can we actually change these things, And that's a really interesting thing to talk about. I want everyone to know that, just like your body, it is influenceable. What are some of the things that you notice from changing your exercise? So what type of benefits are these people going to see cognitively? Is it just brain flow? Is it, blood flow? Is it actually increased electrical activity? Is it manipulating your brain neurochemistry? What are the things people would see from just exercise alone? Let's just dive into exercise. And obviously my demographic, absolutely, 100% of my demographic exercises. They exercise. It's probably the biggest modality they're using to influence their brain health. And a lot of people are confused around, mindfulness and meditation. They're confused around nutrition. The one thing my demographic does get is exercise, but I want them to know what benefits should they be expecting.
When it comes to exercise, I just want to say all exercise and physical activity is good for the brain, and the purpose of activity for brain function is to stay active consistently throughout the lifespan. All research points to that. So the number one job, if you're a trainer, is to keep your clients active throughout their entire lives. That's the number one job in terms of brain health. If you are not a trainer and you just want to know for your own health, stay active your entire life by any means necessary. So even though I might talk about the differential effects, I don't want to come across as this is better or anything like that. Just stay active. Physical activity and exercise is one of the number one things to keep a healthy brain, healthy cognition, as is continued learning, as is sleep nutrition. But for exercise,
that's a quick question.
Sorry, go ahead.
What's this is maybe a completely subjective question, but what's the best way to influence brain health? So is it effort? Is it learning new skills? Is it just moving? Like, have you dived into any research about the best, like how those things are working differently, right? So obviously if I work hard, that's going to work differently.
Yeah, well, one of the number one indicators of continued brain health is continued learning. I have to disagree with the whole hustle hard thing, because if it involves less sleep, well, I appreciate that sleep science is coming into that hustle hard community and that message. But if it's about working as much as you can, that you want to manage autonomic nervous system regulation, you want to manage your lifestyle, maintaining a healthy lifestyle and continued learning. Right. I mean, we could stop the podcast here and just stop on those, but it's too obvious for people, right? And so, and also sometimes the obvious isn't obvious implemented. It's not, common sense is not common practice, if that makes sense. But those are the two things: healthy lifestyle, continued learning. And research does show that. Those are the number one and probably 2 indicators of a healthy brain throughout the lifespan. But let's go back to exercise. One of the most well-researched modalities of exercise and its effects on the brain is aerobic exercise. It's one of the easiest things to study. And a lot of these studies come from animal models, but there's a lot of transfer. They're starting to do human studies a lot more. And there's definitely not enough research, but there's a lot. And I think there's enough to pull from. So with aerobic exercise, it does several things to the brain. It improves blood flow. But it also improves angiogenesis, the creation of new blood vessels. And so not only are you improving blood flow, but you're creating new blood flow in blood vessels so that you can maximize the amount of blood that's available to the brain. That's huge. Then we have something called neurogenesis. It's the genesis, the creation of new neurons that it's just brain tissue. It's kind of like muscle tissue, and you're creating almost like brain hypertrophy. Your brain doesn't dramatically get as big as your biceps might, and there is some water weight stuff, and you can't see size differentiation. But neurogenesis, angiogenesis, then there's synaptic protein expression. Just like eating more protein and having those as the building blocks for muscles, you also have the protein expression in the synapses, which are the areas of the brain that kind of talk to each other between these neurons. They send signals without getting too deep into it, and they can build more. There's more expression of protein so that they can have those building blocks to assemble. And then there's also actual size increases of areas of the brain like the hippocampus, which is responsible for learning and memory. And so those are the main benefits that you see in the research and you'll read about in popular articles. And that's coming from aerobic training. And it also improves executive function. And like we said earlier, executive function that's that umbrella term for the main mental processes of attention, planning, organization, working memory, emotional regulation, etc. And then the question might be, well, I'm lifting weights, I'm not running all the time. Do I still get the benefits? And the answer is yes. They're not the same mechanisms, but resistance training, and the resistance training they're doing is pretty linear, traditional. Most of these interventions are on a treadmill or very basic linear exercises. They don't get too complex. But resistance training is being shown to improve executive function. But the cool part is it has more expression of synaptic protein expression than aerobic exercise. So it's kind of like if you're lifting weights, you have more use of protein building blocks in your muscle tissue than just aerobic. It's kind of a similar thing for the brain.
Explain to me what that means.
Synaptic protein expression.
Yeah. So understand my demographic, it would be the science geeks, right? My demographic are the people who they want to know the deep dive.
So let's understand that synaptic protein expression is sort of like building muscles, right? We have muscle fibers, and then in order to get more cross-sectional area of the muscle fibers, we need protein as the building blocks. With synapses and neurons, we also need building blocks, fats, proteins, etc., that allow your brain to construct these new tissues. And so the expression of the synapses, the protein expression, is kind of like when your muscle tissue essentially can express a new genetic profile, epigenetic profile for uptaking protein and then doing more stuff with it. Very same thing with the synapses. Was that explained well enough? Okay. Yeah. So basically, growth and function are the two benefits of exercise. If we look at coordination exercise,
sorry to interrupt you, specific to the synapse, right? So obviously synapse is going to form new neurological connections to allow us to diversify those synaptic connections.
Yes, exactly. And speed them up, be more efficient, create more of them, grow larger, myelinate so they move faster and they're protected, reduce inflammatory markers in the brain, which is associated with dementia. So there's a lot of different mechanisms at play here.
Very fascinating. So obviously that's just maybe another argument for why we need this dietary protein. And we argue that we probably need more than most people are eating.
Definitely. So when it comes to diet, I don't want to get too far off track, but we can talk about diet in the brain. Most of the emphasis is on healthy fats, antioxidants, having enough protein, huge talks about ketosis and calorie restricted diet being the best for cognition and lifelong brain health. But we'll get into that in a little bit.
Sure.
It's definitely not my biggest area of expertise is nutrition, but there's some basic principles there we can talk about.
Yeah, that'd be great.
For other modalities of exercise, what about coordination exercise? We look at dance, we look at capoeira, we look at complex movement patterns. And there's a part of your brain called the cerebellum, which is usually responsible for coordinating full body movements and coordination in general, but it also has effects on executive function like attention. And so if we were to do coordinative movements, it actually improves size and function of the cerebellum. And then if we were also to do that, the coordination like motions and things with rhythm and timing affect this area of the brain called the basal ganglia, which is usually responsible for anxiety, coordination, dopamine response. And so you can affect other areas of the brain. There's also one called the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible primarily for these executive functions. And so the main idea here is not to get too complicated, but if we have aerobic training, coordination training, resistance training, rhythmic, dance, we have mindful movements like yoga, tai chi, qigong, and they all have differential benefits. Why would we not want to garner all the benefits of each of those? And the only way to do that is to get a variety of movement modalities into your practice if your goal is brain health.
That brings up a great point, because that's often a question that I have with myself is, I like to do a lot of different things. For many years, I perfected, the craft of building muscle and exercising a very specific way. Is it better for people looking to optimize brain health to dabble in a lot of different things or go deep on a few of them? So obviously, do I want to go deep to the point of mastery from a brain health perspective? Or do I just want to get to the point where I'm just subjecting my body to as many different types of stimuli as possible?
Yeah, I think it definitely depends on your goal. If you're looking for like this general brain health, I'd say it'd be your first strategy, which is to dabble in a lot of different things. And if you were to learn a sports skill or you were to learn an instrument, the period of time that you're learning is the time that's beneficial. If you're just a master at it and you're really good, you're now efficient at that. And so you, just like your muscle tissue, you've kind of stopped responding. Not that staying active in a sports skill and an instrument isn't healthy for your brain. It is. It's just that period of motor learning. And remember, we talked about learning being one of the number one predictors of lifelong brain health. That period of learning is the real gold. And so if we dabble short enough to not really get any learning benefit, but long enough to do so, then it makes sense. And if we specify just on one thing, you may get the benefit of the motor learning from that one thing or the adaptation from that one thing. But what about from the other ones? And so it's sort of this paradox. So you want to dabble long enough to get the benefits, maybe 4 to 6 weeks, just like you would a normal program, maybe 2 at the least, to get the benefits of something. And then you might want to move on or incorporate it with other things. So if I'm trying to throw and catch a ball against a wall, pretty easy scenario, but can I do it really fast? Well, can I do it just with my fists? Well, can I do it with both hands? Well, can I do it while doing a lunge pattern? And so I'm actually taking the cognitive load and the physical load, and I'm progressing them just like I would my exercise routine. And so if you do dabble, I just want to strongly suggest track your progress. Notice how you're feeling subjectively, and you can also use cognitive tests and other measurement tools to objectively track yourself on certain domains of cognition. But you want to stay in that learning, and you want to keep the complexity and the novelty of it. The novelty is key. However, if you're really looking for one specific outcome, like for me, I have adult ADHD, I have attention problems, I have verbal fluency issues, I really need to do more aerobic exercise because I'm a dabbler. I like to dabble, and the ADHD version of me is walking in the gym just doing whatever I think is interesting at the time. I think everyone can relate to that. But I need coaching for aerobic training, motor skill learning, and sports skill training because I didn't have that in my childhood and it affects me. I'm kind of clumsy, so my cerebellar prefrontal stuff isn't the best. And so when I do that type of training, I notice a significant difference in my life, my personal relationships, my work productivity, and that's what I need specifically. And I don't know if that will stay the same going into my life, but as I have those as a nice foundation, I might want to start pulling in other things.
It's beautiful. So that's kind of the answer I was looking for, and you hit it right there at the end was you have individual needs. So you notice that you personally lack focus. You notice you personally lack coordination. You notice you personally lack X, Y, Z.
Yeah.
Walking down the path of just kind of identifying what your limiting factor is and training for that seems to be the answer, right? Like ultimately, if you lack focus, maybe take that a little bit deeper. If you're someone who, you have great focus, but maybe you lack creativity, well, maybe then it's dabbling in a whole bunch of different things.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, super interesting. I'd love to do a little deep dive into some neurochemistry. So how exercise is directly going to impact my brain. So one of the things that I did for many years, and many people listening to this will attach to this, understand where I'm coming from. Many people train angry. They train angry, and they're developing this neurochemical state based around anger and attaching it to exercise. And so every time I go to the gym, I'm bringing back this state of anger and aggression. And then I believe you're indoctrinating that into your nervous system. And every time you go to train, you're bringing back these angry feelings. You're bringing back these negative emotions. Obviously, that doesn't make a lot of sense. And that's probably not the best way to do it. I've actually seen some research suggesting, the best state to be in when you're training at any level is be happy, be joyful, be smiling, be joking. And a lot of bodybuilders go, oh no, man, you got to be pissed off. You got to train angry. What type of neurochemical reactions, cascades are happening when we work out? What I want to get into is how exercise influences them. So we know they're going to be released, but the amounts in which they're released, you said you may not be an expert on, but the amounts in which they're released is going to immediately influence our brain state. So whether we're going to be motivated, whether we're going to be tired, whether we're going to be sad, happy, anxious, all these things. How do we know, from your experience, how do we know that exercise is positively influencing it, and exactly how is it positively influencing? Is it just, do you have any idea?
Yeah, you can go off subjective experience, I think, because it's not reasonable for everyone to get saliva and blood tests and QEEGs every time they work out. Yeah. So with norepinephrine, for example, usually responsible for concentration, at least a healthy level allows it. I'm going to say low end to high end, but it doesn't mean low norepinephrine or high epinephrine. Low end means like the negative, high end means the positive. On the low end, if whatever the levels are, there's doubt, but on the high end, there's certainty. On the low end, there's obsession. On the high end, there's determination. On the low end, there's dementia. or poor memory. On the high end, there's recall and memory. And so if you're experiencing doubt, obsession, dementia-like symptoms, or memory-like symptoms, you could probably have suboptimal norepinephrine levels. Is that kind of where we're going?
Yeah, that's great.
Cool. Let's talk about dopamine. So with dopamine, usually responsible for regulating alertness, as well as many other things like motivation, the opposite end of motivation would be just being hyper. And a lot of people have obsession over their training, and they're hyper about their training, which is kind of what we're talking about. And so their dopamine norepinephrine relationship probably may be suboptimal, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
Going back to dopamine, if we have clarity on the positive side, we have ambiguity on the negative side, which is I'm confused, I have some brain fog maybe. With the dopamine, once again, there's working memory, which are kind of active, memorizing things that are going on, being aware. And there's passivity. You're kind of like a vegetable. You may say they're present, but really they're just spaced out. With serotonin, which is usually responsible for satisfaction, on the positive end, we have relaxation. On the negative end, we have insomnia. And this is when we see people overtraining or training in a way that maybe isn't healthy for them that this occurs. On the positive end, we have pleasure with serotonin. On the negative end, we have anxiety. On the positive end of serotonin, again, we have learning and memory. On the negative end, we have disability. And then the cool part is when these things interact. So when dopamine and serotonin interact positively, you have good appetite regulation, good motivation. When norepinephrine and dopamine interact, you have good attention, executive function. When norepinephrine and serotonin interact well, you have good endurance. And altogether, you have a balanced mood. That's
so beautiful. There's so much in that right there where people can pull out. So where I was leading you was like, how different types of exercise are going to influence our different type of brain state. Right. So if someone is maybe lacking, they feel as though they're lacking motivation, they feel as though they're lacking, the ability to feel calm or something like that.
Right.
Maybe the type of training they're doing should be different.
Exactly.
So, if someone's very anxious, well, maybe it needs to be more of a calm training that's going to be more, serotonin focused. Whereas if you're someone who lacks motivation, you got to get a big dopamine spike. Maybe you need to do something that's more adrenaline focused, right? Like something that's very intense, very hard.
I think you hit the nail on the head. You're on the right track there.
Yeah, super interesting, man. Because that would be a skill set and a tool for our listeners to really dive into. Like, if everyone's different, man, everyone's lacking certain things in life. Everyone's seeking certain things in their life. Maybe that's why we're drawn to certain activities.
Sure, I think so. I think we're geared towards them, or maybe we're just self-organizing. Maybe we have this cognitive, psychological homeostasis, and we want to interact with the environment to get what we need. And sometimes our environment isn't conducive for that. And sometimes our knowledge, our resources are not conducive for that. And that's why a lot of people might struggle.
Awesome, man. Walking down the path of influencing these neurochemicals you said you're not an expert in nutrition, I know, but let's dive a little bit into what you recommend to your clients for brain health optimization when it comes to the simplicity of nutrition. Like what are the simple variables that you suggest?
Yeah, the simple variables, if I really want them to track their food so I know what I'm dealing with. Because if I say a calorie restricted diet and they have an eating disorder, we're screwed, right? Yeah. And so I want them to track their food for at least a week before, and usually I have a pretty good idea. And I don't want to skip just to supplements before we even get a good foundation, a good baseline. So basically what I'm looking for is what is their calorie intake? Do they have a healthy source of fats? And what is that relative to their carbohydrates? So very much like Jason Phillips, who I would refer to for something like this, I want to look at the macronutrients more than anything. And the macronutrients, that balance probably reflects what's happening with their cognition. A lot of attention is being given to ketosis right now because of the high fat, low carbohydrate, low sugar, balanced protein intake. I would probably err on that side. I wouldn't say I'm a ketosis guy, but I want a healthy source of fats, probably some calorie restricted diet and good hydration. And supplementing that with micronutrients, omega-3s, maybe some krill oil, anything where we can get these healthy fats. Because if you have these healthy fats, you have the DHA, which is really the building blocks for the brain, and you have the EHA, which is this neuroprotective, functional part of the brain. And so if you have a good balance of those, you have good structure and function resources for the brain to use through your nutrition. And so I'm really looking for those main factors.
Awesome, man. So what are some of the environmental factors that worry you? Meaning, obviously we're subjected to a lot of things in current society, in the culture we have, from, EMFs to light, to toxic chemicals in our water and in our food. What are the things people should be watching out for when it comes to brain health?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think those things are important, but they're a little bit more detailed. And I don't always go there because sometimes people don't want to go there and they're not aware of those things, or I'm not an expert on those things. But when I say environment, I'm really looking for, do you have things like purposeful work? What's your circadian rhythm? Do you have good social support? Are you around nature? Are you not? I really want to know the basics because there's great research to show if you don't have good social support, access to nature, you don't have good work, you have a shitty circadian rhythm, your cognition's going to decline, your brain health's going to decline. And so I'm really trying to check those things off. And usually I find a pretty big basic factor that they don't have. Like they don't have good, like they'll go out a lot and they'll hang out with friends, but they don't feel like deep connection. And you need that oxytocin, or maybe they don't have a significant other, or maybe they're working 9 to 5, but it's not meaningful work. They don't have their why statement about it, their purpose. And I don't think I would help them get that, but I'd point them in the direction to go there. Maybe a therapist could help. They can do a self-development course, stuff like that. And so that's what I'm looking for in the environment. I'm also looking at light, just the general circadian rhythm. When they wake up, do they go outside between the hours of 8 and 11 just to get that sunlight and through that suprachiasmatic nucleus so your circadian rhythm can kickstart? Are you going to bed at a reasonable time? Do you have excessive screen time? Are you sitting down a lot? I love looking at sedentary behavior because that's my main tool is movement and exercise for getting them healthy brain-wise. And if they're really sedentary, but they're working out an hour and a half a day, like, I'm good. But you're being sedentary, your body and your brain are meant to move. So taking frequent movement breaks, being able to do novel movements, take 5 minutes, go juggle, do a lunge matrix in different directions, play with a tennis ball, go play with your animal or play with a kid. I mean, are you playing at all? Play is huge. So I'm looking at these different factors of their environment, interacting with others, interacting with their environment to see how that would affect brain health. But those are the basics I look for.
Cool, man. Let's do a little rapid fire here, Ryan. I got some questions for you, and I want you to give us some feedback on a few of these things. So someone has anxiety. What would be the first avenue of attack for you? So what would you recommend? What would be the first recommendation, the first prescription for someone who's living with anxiety?
Okay,
I got a bunch of these.
So this is what I would do for a person with anxiety that's my client. The very first thing I do is I do an extensive intake. We don't have time to go over that here. But once we go through that, I have them do an exercise. And the exercise is make a T chart and put parasympathetic on the left-hand side and sympathetic on the right-hand side. Sympathetics fight or flight, parasympathetics rest and digest, and write out the top 3 stressors that are your sympathetic inputs. It can be stressful work, and you can get specific about it. It could be a stressful relationship. It could be a health condition, a psychological condition, thoughts that you have that are recurring. And then on the left-hand side in the parasympathetic column, write down the things that bring you the most relief. What are your parasympathetic inputs? You have good sleep. You exercise on a regular basis. You take baths at the end of the day to relax. And then assign on the right side each of those 3 bullet points a 1 out of 10, 10 being the most stressful of an input, 1 being the least stressful. Then add them up. And then on the left-hand side, rank the parasympathetic bullet points, 1 being the most or least relaxing, 10 being the most relaxing. And so if you rank those and we say, okay, I have a total score of 25 on the sympathetic side, and I have a total score of 15 on the parasympathetic side, well, you have more points on your sympathetic side. So through ANS regulation principles, we would say that number for the parasympathetic needs to be at least twice as much for the sympathetic. So if they're at 25, they should be at a 50 on the parasympathetic side.
Amazing. Somebody lacking sleep.
I would do very much a similar thing. But I would also use this top-down, bottom-up, external-in model. I want to know what they're doing for exercise. That's positive and negative. Also for nutrition. So they say, okay, I exercise aerobically 3 times a week, but negative, I'm sedentary most of the day. Top down, positive, I have a good growth mindset. Negative, I have too much work stress. Environment, positive, I love where I live. Negative, I have too much screen time. Okay, let's congratulate them for the positives, but how can we work on those negatives? Would screen time, more exercise or less sedentary behavior, or stress management help them with their sleep? I pick one that I intuitively feel or they would feel would be the most impactful in moving the needle, or I would do a combination of all of them.
Awesome, man. And now somebody who maybe lacks that motivation to that drive to, jump out of bed in the morning and attack life?
Absolutely. I would say look at your bottom up factors. What are you doing with your body first? Are you exercising? If you're exercising, are you doing one type? I would look at their exercise variability. I'd probably bias towards aerobic exercise for those individuals, or I would bias towards maybe a group class where they have social accountability. Even if it's not the best form of exercise, I would want them to have social accountability, something that they can be externally accountable to. On the top-down model, I would look at maybe some form of journaling, whether it's gratitude or productivity journaling for that internal accountability. And in an environment, I would look at what's going on with screen time, light exposure, look for circadian rhythm balance.
Man, it seems like it all comes back to the same stuff, right? It seems like it all comes back to take care of yourself, slow down, breathe more, meditate a little bit, and exercise. Every morning for me is yoga, meditation, and usually some type of exercise. And if I don't do that, I definitively don't feel as well. I definitively don't speak as well. I definitively don't think as well. I'm not as focused. And the answer is right there. But yet I 100% of the time, I don't make time. Like 80% of the time, I'm knocking it out. But that 20% of the time, I'm always asking myself, like, why did I miss that today? Like, there's nothing really that important. And, as Craig says, you got to learn to say no. And once you found what works for you, it's easy.
Go for it. And once you've mastered a consistent use and application of the basics, then we have our next podcast on the advanced applications.
Amazing, Ryan. I appreciate you so much, man. Brain health is such a big thing for all of us. So thank you.
Thanks for having me. This has been great.
Pleasure, man.